Testing. Hello, 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 hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the HR Leadership Summit. Give yourself a hand of applause. Phenomenal. I want to start off by thanking everybody for being here. It is incredible to be back at the Trust, to be back to see a venue packed out. I was speaking to someone the other day saying that we have this event coming up, and they said, Frano, you're crazy. It's going to be the 5th of December. And we had 550 registrations to this night, and we have a packed audience filling the seats. So thank you so much on a Tuesday evening coming out. This just again is a testament of the phenomenal following that we've got, the incredible community that you are, and I want you again to give yourself a round of applause for being here. Thank you so much. Tonight is an incredibly special evening for us here at Whamley. I am going to share with you a bit about what this evening is about, what we're going to be journeying on. So from an agenda perspective, we will have a keynote from Mark Sham. Mark will need no introduction, but I'll call him up in a second. And then secondly, after that, we're going to have an interactive session with me here on the couch with esteemed guests sitting here in the front. Thank you so much for being here. Clients of ours sharing with you their use cases, lessons learned, challenges faced, how they overcome them, and then the learnings from these projects that they embarked on. So you're in for a night filled with insights. I want to encourage, like we always do, that you interact, that you ask questions. There will be various Q&As throughout the evening. I really want to encourage us to learn. And that is really what we're about. Apart from being Whamley video interview software, these initiatives and these events here at the Trust is giving back to the HR community. Who has been here more than once? Twice? 3 times? I feel like I'm singing a song now. What's that? 3 times a lady. Yeah, and let me not go there. 4 times? Oh, well. Thank you, wife. And who else? You would know, and you would often hear me say this, that I absolutely fundamentally believe that in South Africa as HR, we do not connect enough. Yes, we have wonderful other conferences where we have thousands of attendees, but really getting together, sharing and learning in an intimate space is what tonight and these events are all about. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Francois de Wet. I'm the founder and the CEO at Whamley. Must I put this on? There we go. I clicked too fast. We are South Africa's largest provider of one-way video interview software. We are HR tech in the hiring space. And I'm so proud to say that in 2023, we helped almost 400 clients interview 43,000 candidates across 3,400 vacancies in 26 countries. Thank you. And 89% of those candidates absolutely loved the journey. And this evening, I want to thank my team. I want to thank our clients. You might recognize some of these logos. Some of these logos might belong to you. If I missed the logo of a client in the audience, please come to me afterwards and say, Fran, you missed us. I apologize. But it's just been such an incredible blessing. And at the end of the evening, I'll share some insights into what we're up to in 2024 and where we're planning on going. But let's get into our first guest speaker, Mark Sham. Mark needs absolutely no introduction. However, Mark, while you're doing an Instagram story, I want you to see me say this, and please join me up on stage. Mark has been such an incredible friend and a colleague and a peer and just a follower of Whamley. And 18 months ago, Mark said, Fran, why don't we try events? And here we are at the 5th event. And I just want to thank you, brother. Thank you so much. So, thank you. Enjoy.
Hello, guys. No, you can definitely do better. Hello, guys. 28 minutes past. Good, so I know. So just settle down as I get through this 4.5-hour keynote. Everything will be fine. No, seriously, I just want to first of all say thank you to each and every one of you for being here. It's not lost on me that you're here on the 5th of December. Did you just not have anything better to do, or like, no, but seriously, it's been a long year. And I think that so many people are tired because this is probably the first year that we've had in 4 or 5 years where we've had like an uninterrupted space to have a crack. And so it's been like everybody's trying to catch up from the COVID patch. And so I know for sure everybody's tired. And then on top of that, you've worked a long day, you have families, and then you still chose to be here. So please give yourselves a round of applause. It is a big deal. I do want to give a shout out to Wamley. I don't have to do this, but I want to. Fran almost tried to steal my thunder there for a second, but it's cool, Fran, because we go way back. It was indeed about 18 months ago that I said to Fran, I think you're onto something here with Wamley. There's no question about it. But if you knew what I knew, you'd be doing some things differently. And I was trying to get him to understand this nature of why events are so important, especially when you use them correctly. And I have to say that Wamley have been overwhelmingly consistent ever since. It's really a testament to them. And the key aspect here is that for the last 18 months that they've been running these events, they have sought every occasion to try add value rather than have a quick smash and grab. And I think they deserve a special round of applause for actually getting it. And then I'd really just like to give myself a shout out for wearing long pants in 30-degree heat. I was thinking about wearing shorts, but apparently I like to do difficult things. I want to talk to you about this very broad topic of leadership. It's actually quite interesting when Fran and them came to me a few weeks ago and said, would you speak on this topic? It's probably the topic that I cringe for the most, right? Because like everybody's got to talk on leadership. And the key aspect here is that, as I've come to learn in my own life, that leadership is much more about what you do and less about what you say. And so what happens with these leadership talks is that someone gets on stage and says, let me just tell you how it is from a leadership perspective. And then they run through you should do this, and this is what perfect looks like. And Mike Tyson, of all people, I can't believe I'm going to quote, but he came up with a beautiful saying, which is that everybody's got a game plan until they get punched in the face. And I think it's very true, right? Because it's easy to be like what we should be doing, and then like the real world exists. So what I want to do is I want to just share some points of view with you. I opted purposefully to actually have no slides, because I actually just want to talk to you as people, if I may. And I want to share just some stories from my own life that I've learned. But I just want to be clear, this is not about me. I'm just using parts of my experiences as a proxy because I know my experiences best. I'm actually trying to get to a point. I just want to use some things that I learned along the way to get to that point, if I may. Probably one of the greatest lessons I had to learn around leadership was in the last few years. Like so many of you, when COVID hit, I really naively thought that that people were overreacting, for one. I think actually people did overreact, but it's a story for another time. But then I thought this thing was going to blow over quite quickly. And here we are. We're heading into 4 years later. You realize how crazy that is, right? March. By March, we will be into year 4, or 4 years completed. And just a bit of background, the building that you're sitting in today, the Tryst, wasn't some beautiful idea that I had for the longest time. It was an absolute necessity COVID response because I was getting the absolute shit kicked out of me and I had no clue what to do. And it brings an interesting point, which is like, I thought I understood leadership fairly well until COVID hit. And it turns out that when COVID hit, I came back to South Africa for what I thought would be 7 weeks, longest 7 weeks of my entire existence. And everything from March 2020 was just trying to figure out what the next step would look like without having any clue what the next year would look like. And it turns out that human beings hate that. We absolutely hate not knowing what the future looks like. It feels very dangerous to us. So you'll see across the board, in personal and professional circles, human beings as a whole are always looking for certainty. And the irony here, before and post-COVID, is that in a world that is changing exponentially because of technology, the only thing we ever guaranteed is change. In a world that all we're looking for is certainty. So it creates quite a conundrum for us as human beings. We're longing this and we get that. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. And if I look back over the last 4 years, I can tell you two things that are absolutely opposing but equally true. The last 4 years were the hardest 4 years of my adult life by a country mile. The last 4 years were the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't say that lightly, though, because it feels a lot like I've been set alight on fire and I've got a smile on my face. You know what they say about entrepreneurship? It's like staring into the deep, dark abyss while chewing glass with a smile on your face, telling people how much you love the journey. But it came with some very valuable leadership lessons, and I just want to share a few with you. And I think the key here is that nothing I say to you right this second is going to be new information. But the key thing about human beings is that sometimes we forget, and all we need sometimes is just a little reminder. And I've got like 25 minutes left with you. And I'm hoping that just one little thing lands. Because when keynote speakers come on stage and do their thing, we tend to want to take them through like a 12-point process, and you better get the entire methodology, and if you don't, it was all a waste. In fact, all you actually need is one simple idea to land above all the others, and if that one resonates with you compared to someone else's idea, just focus on that and don't think about anything else. I want to talk to you about change, pain, and self. I'm starting to see more and more that leadership is a cliche. You know, the way we think of leadership is actually quite broken. And the older I get, the more I realize that leadership really isn't about being connected to rank or title. In a sense, anybody can be a leader. And so we tend to confuse the two because someone has a higher position, they're a so-called leader. But we all know in the real world that that's absolutely not true. At any point in time in your life, you've probably worked for someone above you and you've thought, what a dipshit. And you were probably right. And the only thing that made them the leader was that they were above you, and so society in general gave them this so-called power to kind of make decisions ahead of you. But we all know how those people don't actually necessarily control everything. And I see that more and more. And the difficult thing exactly about leadership is that you can't tell other people how to be better leaders. You have to show them. And so one of the hardest things about becoming a leader, if that is your aim, how do I lead my organization more effectively, is that you have to become the very thing you're trying to teach, which is probably the hardest thing. And you have to do it in this way where simultaneously you're okay with making many mistakes and then correcting them and learning from them and not looking too perfect, but still coming across as if you know what you're doing. Because you need people to believe you. And you can't really push people into a direction. They have to be willing to follow you. So I firmly believe that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Simon Sinek has spoken about this endlessly, so I'm not getting into it. And I'm not just talking about your proverbial why, but there is something that's quite important about knowing why the hell you do what you do. And it's startling to me how few people actually know why they do what they do. And by the way, getting a paycheck isn't the answer, right? It's the byproduct of what you do, and of course we need it. But this key thing, it's a lot like parents. Like how many of you have kids here? How many of you ever taught your kids how to have a very specific accent? You know what that process is like, right? You're trying to tell them, no, don't speak like that, speak like this. But kids are mimicking machines. You can't, in a way, teach your kids how to speak a specific way. They just pick up their accent from the world around them. And I'm starting to see quite simply that leadership is a lot like that. So just before COVID, I started talking on this topic of happiness in the workplace. And people often give me that glazed look when I tell them that I speak about happiness. Because oftentimes they think what I'm referring to is the feeling, the emotion, which I often argue is fleeting. So when someone calls me a motivational speaker, I literally want to shoot them in the genitals. I'm not here to motivate anyone. I think that motivation is like the dumbest idea ever. Because what it is let's just say I managed to be the best motivational speaker today. The problem is that your problems still exist on Monday. It's a lot like a sugar rush, right? So I can walk in here and go we can do this, guys, and it's been a hard year, but let me tell you what's going to happen in 2024. And I can get you hella hyped up, and then you go and you might have 2 drinks tonight, and I promise you tomorrow you're going to wake up feeling very unmotivated. So I've been speaking about the topic of happiness in the form of, I think of happiness as learning to acquire the mental tools and the emotional infrastructure to deal with complexity. I want you to understand, if you don't already, that we are currently living in an environment and a society that has never been more complex than it is today. And no one actually prepared us for this complexity. So we go to school to learn all these incredible things, math, English, science, computer literacy. We do this cute little thing once on a Friday for half an hour called life orientation, and we're like, off you go, buggers, hope you got it. But don't you find it funny, like no one teaches you how to be happy? Which is quite funny, right? Because like, if I were to ask all of you here, like, do you want to be happy? Unless you're a total sadomasochist, you would all say you want to be happy. And is it fair to say that we all want to get to our deathbeds at whatever age, look back and say, that was a good, happy, successful, fulfilled life? So then don't you find it funny, like, why isn't happiness not a subject from the 1st to the 12th grade the way math is? I'm not saying math isn't important. I just think that like happiness is equally important. But it actually goes a little bit further. All these things that we really need to thrive in the future aren't taught to us. But thank God for Pythagoras, because that helped me during COVID, let me tell you. Got me through my darkest days. And so one of the interesting things that I'm learning about leadership is that we're always so focused on how to be a good leader to get other people to do certain things. And I think we got it back to front. I think you can only ever be a good leader when you actually focus on how you are. It's the inside-out mentality. And it's another one of the things that people don't teach you. You don't go to school and get taught how to have a relationship with others to begin with. It's quite crazy how we all wired differently. And in a country like ours, it's a good example of if left with enough time, people will start to see different as bad rather than just different. And we don't actually understand fully how people are different and why. And we haven't learned how to deal with each other. But largely because how can we even begin to have a relationship with others when we don't even have a relationship with ourselves? And so the interesting thing is that we're trying to get people to move at scale, but we don't even understand why we do what we do. We don't even understand why our behaviors are our behaviors. And we don't even like to have those chats because like there aren't that many spaces where you can have a real raw discussion around relationship with self. I'll give you a simple example. You know what I wish they told me when I was a kid? I wish someone stopped me and said, "You're not going crazy, boy. We've all got that annoying voice in our heads that comments about everything incessantly all the time. I call that voice the roommate. And I label it as such because if you've ever lived in a house share with other people, you realize that you don't have to take everything your roommate says as true or real. And so because we don't even acknowledge that voice in our heads, we don't get taught as young kids how to decipher when to listen and when not. Because sometimes your roommate will offer you very solid advice and you will ignore it at your peril. How many of you, for argument's sake, even in the HR space, have met someone and you're like, your roommate is like, something is off here, do not proceed. And you're like, yeah, fuck it, I'm just doing it anyway. But then how many times does your roommate lie to you and you believe it? I wonder, there's a lot of women here in the crowd, like how many of you looked at yourself in the mirror this morning and your roommate was like, you're fat, you're ugly. And that is terrible advice. You should not listen to it, but you do so at your peril. So because we don't even acknowledge this roommate, we don't even get taught when to decipher, when to listen and when not, and it shows. Now, why am I talking about that? Because what happened to us during COVID was out of nowhere, and this is just my own sub-story, being a person who runs events, who speaks for a living, who does all these things that require people to gather together in person, I woke up one morning, it all got taken away, and we had no surety of when it would come back. And I kept thinking, it'll come back, it'll come back, it'll come back. So then Cyril called a family meeting. He was like, you've got 3 weeks to drink, go nuts. And I did. I took him up on that advice. Turns out that was a terrible piece of advice that I listened to. And then he said, you can have another 2 weeks. And it kind of ended June last year when we took away the masks. Remember that? And so I remember very clearly going like, oh my God, I'm in real trouble. Like I've got no backup. I can't run my events. And one of the first things I did was I just got hold of 2 broadcast cameras, old school. And I set them up and one of my early clients called me and said, I've been watching what you've been doing with these webinars. Could you do it for us? And I was like, but this is not even my business. This is not what I do, but like I need to eat. And so before I knew it, the trust was born. And the thing is that in life, we're constantly looking for the paint by number system. What do I do now? We're always waiting for someone to tell you like, go from grade 1 to grade 2. Then when you land at grade 2, you do these things, right? Then you pass this test, then you go to grade. We often wonder why 18-year-olds are so confused. For 18 years of their life, we tell them what to do. And then you're like, what next? And you're like, it's up to you. And they're like, what? But where's the manual? And so for like 3 years, we then like had a little office in WeWork, and then I started looking around for a space, which I was hoping to be like the size of this room, and then I landed up in 1,500 square meters. So my math was terrible. And before I knew it, we were in the space, and just as we got going, they locked us down in June 2021 again. Do you remember that? Like level 4, you can't even go to the restaurant, sorry for you. And it was quite an interesting time with government. They were kind of like, sorry, you can't do what you do for a living, but we can't help you. Off you go. It was just, your hands are tied behind your back, good luck. And what was so interesting is I kept finding myself being in a victim state. Like, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do that, and what do I do now? And I'm a seasoned entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. And even I find myself looking for the paint by numbers system. What next? And it brought up such an interesting point that as you go through your leadership journey, the more comfortable you can become with the unknown, and the more comfortable you can become with figuring it out along the way. This doesn't mean you don't plan, you don't prep, but there's actually a biological reason that we differ from that. Is because one of the other things I talk about in the happiness talk is that we are fundamentally wired to do anything to avoid hard. And what comes with that is that oftentimes what we do is we'll do anything to avoid pain. And we don't speak about this enough because it's a little bit like morbid, right? But it's true. This is the problem that we're doing is human beings are wired in such a way that we'll do anything to avoid pain, which is impossible. And then we do the classic thing, we do anything to numb it. By the way, throwing yourself into your work for 18 hours a day is a form of numbing. Scrolling endlessly on Instagram is a form of numbing. We tend to think of numbing as like sex, drugs, rock and roll. But there's like multiple formats of numbing that you can do. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn in the last few years is simply this paradox. It's the key thing I just want to leave you with. Your brain is designed to keep you safe, not make you happy. I'm going to say it again because I think it's worth repeating. Your brain is designed to keep you safe, not make you happy. And why this is so important is that in the form of safety that your brain is looking for, the unknown is dangerous. We evolved in environments that look terrible from 50,000 years ago or more. We've just been dropped into this environment that now is moving exponentially. And so in the old days, the unknown meant certain death. But I just want to check, how many of you have recently wrestled a tiger or like an alligator on your front stoop, right? Unknown has changed. The unknown is no longer dangerous because our environments are far safer, but what happens is that the unknown mentally and emotionally is dangerous, and we steer from it. And I had to learn this valuable lesson, that pain is actually a precursor for growth. Now, we speak about this all the time, so it's not like I'm telling you anything new, but I just want to break it down a bit further. Pain is what helps you understand something emotionally, where previously you only understood it intellectually. A great example of this is if I brought a hot stove on the stage and I put my hand on it in front of all of you, you're not dumb. You could see that it is burning, right? You would hear it even sizzle. You would hear my skin. You would see my hand burning on this hot stove. But here's the thing. It's when you're standing on the stage, and it's when your hand is on that hot stove, and it's when you are feeling that pain viscerally through every single fiber of your nervous system. It's when you feel that you know not to put your hand on this hot stove again. So oftentimes we're watching other people do something, and that's understanding something intellectually. But when you feel it with your own hands, you now understand it emotionally. And as I've come to learn, if you really want to master anything, you need a catalyst between understanding something intellectually and emotionally and bringing it together. So the irony is that pain is actually what helps us understand the world in a way that we won't make those mistakes again, but we'll do anything to avoid pain. Which is ironic because it's impossible. And then so you find this loop. Just a screensaver. You might just want to go back to my slide there. That whole one slide. So here's what I'm getting at. In the last few years, I only learned a simple lesson. I learned around leadership that you can't tell people what you do, you have to show them, which means you have to become a specific type of person that can do the very things that you talk about, but you're going to make lots of mistakes, and you have to be willing to show people that side. The only thing with mistakes you never want to do is you never want to keep repeating the same mistake over and over and over and over, because then you're not learning the lesson. But the problem is that we don't really engineer space for mistakes in the workplace, and this is where I really want to encourage you, not only for yourself. Because what we do is from young, we tell kids that mistakes are good. And then we slap them on the wrist the second they get something wrong on a test. We tell people, that's when people tell me we rewrote our values and we've got those mission boards, those mission statements at the front of our like our offices. Most of the times I want to vomit on those statements, if I'm honest. Because all you have to go do is just do a quick audit and say, you said all these things on your front desk. Let's just go see, like a base. And the best way to actually find it is, especially if you're a man, just be having a wee at the urinal and ask someone a question. How's it going with this? And they're like, people say this, but they do that. Men are very honest when they have their genitals in their hands, I must tell you. It's quite funny. I'm just checking if you're awake, just checking. So what we do is we keep telling people in the workplace that mistakes are good. You must make mistakes because that's how you learn. And the second that someone makes a mistake in the workplace, they're like, I took initiative. I try to make this happen. We're like, and what you create is this like very sterile vanilla place where someone is walking very carefully on this tightrope because they don't want to make mistakes. And you can see it because when companies start using the word innovation, they're most likely the least innovative company that you could find. So we get into the tryst. And my staff keep going, we've got one or two people and they're like, what now? What next? And I'm like, I don't know, George. I've never been through a global pandemic. Have you? What I learned in the COVID patch was that it was a real testing of my mettle. I was just actually fortunate that I had absolutely no choice but to make it work. I had no one to go to for help post that. There was no one who could bail me out with money. So not getting it right was not an option. And it is unbelievable what you are come up with when you are forced to. Like, just think about it for you guys. I promise you, we often make like excuses for the things we can't do, but just let me grab one of your kids, put a gun to their head and tell, could you get this right? I promise you, you find some unbelievable force to get it going. And every time something came in my way, load shedding then hit in the middle of last year. I wouldn't say unexpected, but it really got bad. And I don't know if you've noticed, it's like a 1,500 square meter building. And when you have no generator or inverter, it is a nightmare to run client events. Okay, well, just hire a generator. Okay, it's just 10 grand every day that you do it. So it was like this. And there were times, honestly, guys, where I was just sitting with my head in my hands, where I wanted to cry, where I wanted to crack, where I honestly thought like, and I'm leveling with you, I'm not saying I would have committed suicide, but part of me got the idea of why people get to a point that pressure is so overwhelming that it feels like the roof is caving in on you from every example. Now, when people on the outside, they'll say to you, but it's not so bad. But it's like, well, just wait until everybody's asking you for payments. And the last thing you can ever do is not pay your staff. Because as soon as you lose that trust, that's gone, right? So for the first few months, I had such an antiness toward pain. But it was that necessity that brought me out of it. It was unbelievable what happened. And quite quickly, I started to learn that I was very good at not repeating mistakes because my life suddenly depended on it. And I got unbelievably better every few months. What would have taken me a few years to learn took me a few weeks to learn because suddenly, like, I had no choice. And I started to develop this irrational comfort around pain. Again, I'm not saying I was looking for the mistake, like looking to make mistakes. And I think it's okay for you to feel what you feel when mistakes happen, which means you simultaneously hate the feeling, but you also know that it's good for you. It brings me to one of two of my last points, which is that human beings are binary by nature. We tend to do this thing where we're on or we're off, we're good or we're bad, we're up or we're down. We can never be both. So let me ask you a simple question. Can you have a job? Can you be grateful to be getting a salary, have a roof over your head, have food, and at the same time, can you be simultaneously under tremendous work pressure? You have a little family, you feel this like angst from every corner. Can both be true? Can you be grateful for what you've got and feel overwhelmingly pressurized? So I just want to remind you of something simple, that you are not a binary creature. Your life lives on a spectrum, excepting for every facet of your life, there's multiple spectrums. And so you are this deeply dynamic human being that is good and bad. Like, I've never been more tired and I've never been more grateful for what I've got as I stand on this stage. And you realize you can be both. So mistakes Mistakes is one of those things that you can simultaneously look at the same way. You can hate making them, but simultaneously know that they're very good for you, provided you're able to sit back, introspect, understand what you got wrong, and fix the lesson. I really want to encourage you to fuck up as much as humanly possible without repeating the same mistake. And lastly, and I'm going to tie this all back, one of the greatest lessons I learned around leadership, specifically with our team, was to be okay with crying in front of my people. I don't wear that as a badge of honor in a sense, but then in another part I absolutely do. They will bear witness to, there have been times where I've just sat in front of them and said, I don't know. And I'm just so emotionally shot and so emotionally broken from not having the answer and having to admit it. And the irony is I've actually seen some of our greatest growth spurts coming from the answer, I don't know. See, this thing around leadership I think is confusing because we're constantly telling, if you want to be a good leader, do this, do this, do this, do this. I don't think it works that way. I think you can see the value of a good leader versus a bad leader in our country. I'm not getting political. I'm saying you can see what happens when something is managed well and when something is managed poorly. You see it in countries, you see it in companies. So we should never shy away from how important leadership is. But we should also do everything to shy away from the cliches. And the cliches for me are as follows. You can't tell people what to do, you have to show them. In order to show them, you have to become the very thing that you want them to be. But you're never going to be perfect, so you have to be brutally okay with mistakes. In fact, you actually have to welcome them. But you don't want to make the same mistakes over and over because that means you're not learning the lesson and then you look like a pupil. Turns out we don't like pupils. Again, I'm just making sure that you're awake. And in doing this, you have to get the story straight in your head. I believe that what we're struggling with at the moment is a form of psychosis in South Africa. We're struggling with like a broken psychology. Because healthy people want other people to grow, and broken people hurt broken people. And you see it everywhere. Now, this sounds pretty morbid, so I'm going to tie it into an upside. The best lesson I learned in the last few years is that because of technology and because of everything that's happening in the world, you don't need a designation or title to stand up and be a leader. You don't have to call a press conference to become one. The idea of a leader is just something that starts in your head. It's an idea, and then you practice it. You can't know your way to leadership, you do it. And anybody can basically become a leader. And it's interesting how other people gravitate toward really good leaders. I really want to encourage you in your space. I've seen it in my own business, that people who started more recently have just become leaders in the business. Not because they're like, one day I'm going to become a leader. They just started doing interesting things, and other people started mimicking that, and I regard them as a leader. And it's amazing how when you see yourself as a leader, not from a title perspective, but from a mental and emotional perspective, how it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've seen this with social media. In order to impact millions of people, you used to have to become an emperor or a prince of an entire country. Now you can be sitting in your undies in your parents' basement on Facebook and you can impact 1 million people. This is kind of the world that we're moving to, where everything's getting disrupted. You can become these things, but it much more sits here and much less about a title. I want to tell you that South Africa doesn't need millions and millions of people to stand up. Your company doesn't need millions and millions of people to stand up. If there are about 250 people in this audience tonight, you actually need a tiny handful, less than 5% of people, to start deciding that they're going to actually throw themselves toward pain, being okay with making mistakes, experimenting often to learn that way, and being okay with the duality of I made the mistake and it's shit, and I made the mistake and it's great. And in that, I don't think it's complicated. I actually think leadership is quite simple. It's just not obvious to most, otherwise everybody would be doing it. I didn't have a lot of time with you tonight, but I wanted to encourage you, not only in your companies, but in this country. I travel the world, and I'm telling you, we live in the most beautiful country on earth. And I'm telling you, the greatest asset that South Africa has is actually its people. It turns out that we've got about 5% of the people who live in this country that ruin it for the other 95%. But the other 95% are the best people on this planet. I live between South Africa and Europe, and I see it all the time. They might be a bit more first world than we are. But I tell you, when I get back to South Africa and I talk to our people, I feel home. I don't say that lightly. And this country is bursting, and it's waiting for small groups of people to become active citizens. Your companies are waiting for small bursts of people who just stand up one day and say, I'm going to just do more. I'm going to do bigger. I'm going to think bigger. I'm going to dream bigger. I'm going to be okay with mistakes. I'm going to be okay with failing to learn. You'll be remarkably surprised how people follow. And then what looks like craziness in the beginning, you look like a genius a few months later. Isn't that how it always works out? This leadership thing obviously needs greater unpacking for sure. I really want to encourage you that in 2024, it's okay to make these mistakes. And it's okay to create a culture of educated guesses and experimentation. In a world that's changing like this rather than this, we can't predict what the future looks like. So we need a culture of experimentation. We need to move away from a factory type of thinking to a laboratory thinking. The schools are still built on a factory. You move from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3 to grade 4. You're like a conveyor belt. Whereas we're living in a world that needs laboratory. We throw little darts at the dartboard, but when you throw a dart, you have to be okay with the fact that it doesn't always land. And my final pro tip, because I think it's quite important. The best leaders in the world know how to slow down to speed up. I'm taking my own advice because this is my final gig for the entire year, and then I'm off. You've heard the classic saying that you can't give from an empty cup. It's so true, but I just want you to know that when you take small places to rest and you break the norm, like some of the first times I started taking time to rest, it was like, I'm going away in February. What do you mean you're going away in February? It's not December. I'm going to go for a walk around the park, and I'm just going to think deeply about the world on a Wednesday afternoon. What are you doing? It's not Saturday. Just know that anytime you try break ground, you are naturally met with resistance from the world around you. People mean well when they do that. But when you try rest on a Wednesday afternoon instead of a Saturday, you will get pushback. But one of the greatest issues that's facing the world is that all human beings tend to think in glances right now. We don't think deep because we've confused productivity with busyness. And you see it all the time. So we think that the faster we go and the more we show how busy we are, that we're actually being productive. But all we're doing is we think shallow in every form. And the greatest innovations, the greatest ideas, the greatest everything comes when we create space and time to be bored and think deeply. So I'm on a strike to end. I know I've got exactly a minute. I'm on a strike to end the idea of getting away from boredom. Getting away from being busy all the time. It's been a long year, peeps. I really do hope if you have the privilege to do so, that you go and you take some time as we close off this year. I really hope you go and take some time. And I don't just mean rest, but you get some restoration. These two are different. Rest is a thing you can do with enough sleep. Restoration is that you fill your soul with things that move you. And I really wish that for each and every one of you, because we need you to come out absolutely firing in 2024. We've got a country to make better, we've got an industry to improve, and we've got bazillions to make. So I want to just say from me to you, thank you so much for being here at the Tryst. You will never know how much it means that you were sitting in this building, and that from that guy who got told all the work was gone to be sitting here on 5 December looking out at this crowd and knowing that that idea can turn into a reality like this over 4 years. It's a beautiful thought and feeling. And to Whamley, you guys get it. You guys just get it. You get it because every event that you've ever run, you spend an enormous amount of money to create endless value for this. You jab constantly instead of going for the right hook. You're always trying to create value before you ask for anything. And I hope more companies learn from your example. Thank you very much for having me, and please give them a round of applause.
Well done.